This is Tell Me What to Read, the podcast of booktopia.com.au. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and I'm thrilled to bring you three special interviews this week. Kicking us off, we got to sit down with Hugh Van Cuylenburg, founder of the Resilience Project and author of Let Go. Then I sat down with ABC journalist Paul Kennedy to discuss his brand new memoir, Funkytown. And lastly, I also got the chance to chat with acclaimed photographer Paul Barbera, covering his new book, Where They Purr. Now over to our interview with Hugh Van Cuylenburg, author of Let Go. My name is Nick Wasiliev, and I'm delighted to be joined by Hugh Van Cuylenburg, discussing his new book, Let Go, on Tell Me What to Read. Hugh, welcome. So to start us off, give us your essential pitch for your new book, Let Go.
I guess for me, after I did the first book, after I did the first one, I kind of, Penguin Random House were pretty excited and said, "Oh, can we do, get another one?" And I said, "No, I definitely don't. That's it. I'm done. I've told you all my stories. That's everything." And they kept sort of not pestering, but just saying, "Just if there's anything you think of, write stuff down. Anything that might." I kept saying, "I've got nothing. I have actually got nothing for you." And then when the COVID hit, my commitments to the world, I was doing TV interview after TV interview, radio interview after radio interview, telling people how to cope in a challenging time. And all the while I felt like, this is not an elevator pitch, obviously. and all the while I noticed there's some things that weren't quite right. I was getting really angry. And I never get angry, ever. I was getting angry at my kids, the people I love most in my life, my wife, my kids. I'm getting angry at them. I'm like, this is weird. I didn't quite understand what's going on though. And then I had an hour and a half sleep one night because my daughter doesn't sleep ever. And I was doing an interview with Dave Hughes on his drive show in Sydney. I'm from Melbourne, so I don't know what the show is. But and at the end of the interview, he said, "And how are you going? You okay?" And I just blurted out and said, "No, I'm totally and utterly broken." And then I kind of went I covered my mouth oh my God, what have I just said? That's not good for my brand. And then I went inside and told my wife. And it was amazing. The second I said, "I'm not okay and I need to sort this out," I just felt so much better. As in, it didn't fix everything, but I was like, oh, at that point, I stopped getting angry. I'd conceded that, and I wasn't, I have to be very clear, I'm very lucky. I've never had depression, anxiety, any of that kind of stuff. And I still didn't, but I wasn't in a good place. And so, that was the point that, I decided that I needed to get help, and I saw a therapist, and that was the, I learned I'm 2 years of therapy than I did in my entire life about resilience, and that's when I called Penguin Random House and said, "I think I might have a book." I'll tell you the other thing was I kept a journal by my in the study, and at night when the kids are going to bed and Penny going to bed, I'd just write what I'd learned about myself, and I kept hiding it. So "Oh God, no one can find this." And then as lockdowns went on and continued to just strangle the human spirit, basically, I just thought, no, do you know what? I think I need to share this because I reckon I'm not the only one battling with this stuff, and that's kind of how it happened, I guess.
How awesome that you that you kept a journal. I love that.
I recorded every session. Took a voice memo of every session we did, and then I wrote notes, and then at night I'd listen to the session again, and then I'd write notes again, and then I remember I was studying a study of myself, kind of and I remember thinking, if I'd been this attentive when I was at uni, God knows what I'd be doing right now.
I'd imagine it would have been a very, when you kind of had that moment when you realized you weren't doing it right, revisiting all of that stuff, that journal and all of those voice notes and stuff must have been even more of an eye-opening experience, or because maybe you didn't realize. Did you not realize, when you were looking at that stuff and looking back at it, that did suddenly something just snap and make sense? And once you had that kind of moment of realization of, whoa, I actually am not okay.
Well, the I'm not okay came first. That was a couple of months before I started seeing a psychologist, because that's what made me think, I need to see a psychologist. So I spent 2 months then, trying to find a psychologist. So that was quite difficult. But then when I found one, then it was from there. At that point on, it was like, just every session I had there, I was like, oh my god, this person's a genius. It's just amazing. And so it was. Sorry, I wasn't very clear there. That was the order. So had the moment of like, I'm not coping, and then 2 months later about 6 weeks later started therapy.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about therapy. I think, some people, try to put the mentality of, just, toughing it out and stuff like that and being okay. And you had written, like in the past that, about not seeing a therapist yourself, despite that you'd recommended it to people for years. How was it? What was it actually like going through the actual process? That kind of, because you kind of touched on it with the catalyst of, seeking help yourself. What was the actual experience like of actually sitting down with a therapist and going through how you were feeling at that time?
Oh, it's unbelievable. I hadn't done it ever because I'd thought, I'm not going to do that. I don't need that kind of help. I quite literally had been so busy doing presentation after presentation after presentation. Whenever someone came up to me and said, I'm struggling, I'd say, well, I'm not a psychologist. You need to see a psychologist. And I was always sort of telling him to do that. But I was like, yeah, one day I'll do it. One day I'll definitely do it. But I've just felt so happy for such a long time. I was like, this is not urgent. Like, it's not an urgent thing to do. And then, I think it was, if it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't have seen a therapist. And if it wasn't for seeing a therapist, I wouldn't have sorted out so much shit that I had in my life that I didn't realize it was kind of holding me back. Like, there was just so many things that I felt like I was kind of going through life with a bit of a handbrake on. And seeing her was like letting go of all the stuff that she got to let go of. It's kind of like I was able to release a handbrake and I just felt so much better ever since.
I want to ask you about vulnerability, because you talk about it a lot in this book. And it's interesting that you talk about that first moment when you were live on air and you were saying like, no, I feel broken as hell, and your first initial reaction was to kind of just rail back and be like, okay, whoa, I just was actually quite vulnerable there for a second. And it is a strain, and I think it is something that I think a lot of people struggle to come to terms with. For you, kind of going on this experience, I'm imagining that vulnerability is now it becomes such an invaluable part of just the functioning of Hugh, the human. Why is it so important in terms of, achieving emotional strength and achieving resilience?
Yeah, well, it's so emotional vulnerability, I've tried to define it very simply in the book as taking just any emotional risk that you can take. And so the reason it's important for human beings is that the research says that's what connects us, and connection is so important. I mean, as many people would argue, it's the main component of having good mental health is good, authentic connection with people and community around you. And without vulnerability, one of the football clubs I work with, they're not a very vulnerable group of guys. They'll connect through taking the piss out of each other a lot. And in doing that, when they turn up to the club, they kind of have their guard up a bit, like they've got their armor up, like they need to armor up because they're going to cop it about something. And there's no vulnerability whatsoever. So everyone walks around with their guard up, like just waiting to deflect whatever's coming their way. And they're not a very well connected group. And I'm working on that currently at the moment. It's very hard. But when you are just able to be yourself and confident enough to be yourself and to make yourself vulnerable, to be seen as you are, like as you are as a person, you open yourself up to genuine and authentic connection.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that openness is invaluable, and I think I definitely agree that guys struggle with it, especially. Why do you think, in your experience, why do you think it is more difficult traditionally for blokes to express that vulnerability? Not necessarily to say that. It's been interesting kind of looking at the space, particularly blokes talking to other blokes, they find particularly difficult. Why do you think that that's the case?
Well, I think traditionally, to go to the start of your question, traditionally, for a lot of men, it's changing. It's definitely shifting. But the men who are out in the world right now, their dads, when they cried, when they're upset, their dads would say stuff like, "Come on, grow up, don't cry, don't be a girl," that kind of stuff. And so we would, I was very lucky my dad didn't do that, but for a lot of men, I think majority of men was like, well, the way society dealt with boys when they're upset was just like, come on, grow up, don't be a man. Don't be a girl, be a man. And you go, okay, I need to be a man. I want to be, I don't want to, I want to be strong and be a man. And so I won't. And so we don't go there. Just from a young age, we were taught that was not the way. Like I've got a 5-year-old right now and I'm just watching him, and, we're all, as little boys, we're so emotional. Like we're so emotional, and so we get so upset so easily. And it's such an important stage of his development, how I respond to him crying right now. Like, I'm able to say stuff to him like, let's have a big cuddle. Like, you cry, so good to cry. And like, I love how you cry when you're sad. That's really good. But I can see how if I said to him right now, don't cry, grow up, toughen up, I can see how that would have a seriously life-changing impact on him. I can just see it. And so I think a lot of men who are out there in the world right now, that's the way they're brought up. But it is changing, definitely, because we're all hearing stuff like this. There's a lot of books out there about this stuff, and there's a lot of people talking about it. So it is shifting.
We've been lucky kind of in this role to talk with with a lot of people who, whether they be male or female, who kind of are writing books and doing discussions around this, and they are seeing change happening online, which I think is so awesome. You're seeing blokes actually be prepared to say, hey, look, I'm not doing okay.
Yeah, totally.
I do want to ask about, you had that moment when you realized you were not okay, and obviously you've gone through that process of kind of working on yourself, and I hope that coming, as we sit here right now, that you're coming to you are at a better point of emotional clarity and calmness. Is there always an end point, or for you does it always feel like that it's a constant stage of just, so some people just go, my aim is to get from point A of feeling terrible to get to point B of not feeling terrible? Is there where's your kind of stance on that, from having first written this book and then gone through this experience? Is it a sense of, have you arrived at a sense of calmness and clarity yet, or is it always just a case of working on yourself?
No, it's not at all. So the book is written, and then we had I honestly had a month of how do I finish this thing, and I ended up, so the final chapter is all about the fact that so I remember once in one of my later sessions in my psych, I just said, I just feel like my life's so messy. We've done all this stuff, I've let go of all these things, but I still feel like things are so messy. And she said, Hugh, the year and a half of chatting to you, what I've realized about you, and she said, and everyone, by the way, is that your life has always been messy. But it's what you do when you're in the mess that really counts. And it made me realize that, I think certain components of life get harder and harder and harder. Some things get much easier. I feel like you become a lot more comfortable with who you are the older you get. This is the most comfortable I've been with myself ever. But then other things get really, really hard. Some things just become harder and harder and harder. My issues I have with the expectation to be, to always be a source of joy and light for everyone around me. That's an expectation I put on myself. My sister got sick, so I felt it was my job to make everyone happy. I've had that very hard to let go of, and at times that's been it's been my doing many times, but that's the one thing I continue to struggle with all the time. And so, we never. It's never like we arrive at a destination of I've made it and I'm happy. There's always something we're struggling with, and I feel like having kids has opened me up to a whole new world of that struggle and that I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. I love them so much and I try so hard. And I've read every book there is to read about parenting, but my God, it's hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. So because of that, my life is the messiest it's ever been right now. And I shudder to think how much harder it would be if I hadn't let go of all the stuff that most therapists have told me to let go of.
Yeah, I think it is always a case of processing, particularly as well if you're, when you are at that stage when you do have kids, and suddenly it's the start of a different sort of life. It's like the other-centered life where they are at the center of everything.
Totally.
I do want to ask you a little bit more about this book, because there's a wonderful chapter in it that I personally enjoyed, which is how you talk about a dinner that you had with Missy Higgins,
Oh,
which is it's such a lovely chapter. And can you share what you learned from that
well, that
night with
was
her?
yeah. Well, that was before I was seeing a therapist, and so so there were so many things happening. So Missy and I hit it off really well through. We got to know each other sort of 2019 and hit it off really well, and we became really good mates. And then our families became. I realised that our kids are the same age, and I get on with her husband really well, and she gets to my wife really well. We just got on really well. So we said we'd have them over we decided to have them over for, it was drinks in the afternoon. We thought, well, drinks in the afternoon. So all the things that I hadn't yet processed in my therapist, like my expectation to make everyone around me just have the best time possible. And then my perfection, like I just want everything to be perfect. And so I was like, this is going to be a perfect afternoon. And unfortunately, we planned it 2 or 3 weeks out. So I had 2 or 3 weeks to plan how this is going to be perfect. And I'm like, we spent a long time working out what music you play when Missy Higgins come over. Like we really agonized over what, like you have to get that right. I reckon. Like you don't want to. In my head, I'm like, if I play the wrong music, she's like, maybe I'm not this good. Maybe I'm not. I mean, the background is like Missy Higgins is probably one of my favorite artists of all time. So that was why I was so excited as well. But so we spent ages trying to work out the playlist. That was the first thing, and we settled on some like really chilled like playlists from Spotify. I can't remember, but then we went to. I was like, we'll get it. We'll also, I'll get it was winter, so I was like, I'll get a fire pit and we'll have a fire. I'll just really relax, have a few beers around the fire, listen to good music, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be so relaxed, and then the kids will get on well, and we'll just I'll post up a few hours. It'll be great, and every single thing went wrong. Like, and it started with her turning up. I think it was like half an hour early, and we weren't ready. And I just panicked, and I just threw all these logs and kindling in the fire pit, and just lit the fire. Went out, got them, brought them in, and then we went and I said, "Oh, do you want to have some beers around the fire?" And they're like, "Are the kids going to be okay around the fire pit?" And I went, and I was in my head, I was like, "Fuck, I haven't thought about this at all." But yeah, they'll be fine. And there's like they're 2 2-year-olds. They were so fascinated by the fire. They're trying to walk towards it, like reach in and grab it. And I was like, next thing I know, we're standing around like goalkeepers trying to stop the kids getting into the fire. And we finally managed to get them, coerce them over to corral them over to the trampoline. But I was like, good, okay, this is how I pictured it. The 4 adults sitting around the fire drinking, and then kids are on the trampoline. This is good, we've got this. And then this horrific smell. And I knew straight away what it was, but I was like, oh, please go away, please go away. And then Dan, Missy's husband, goes, is something on fire? And I knew what it was. And he goes, I think your turf. We had synthetic turf, and I just put the bowl of fire on top of synthetic turf. He goes, I think it's your turf. And I went, nah, I don't think so. And Missy goes, no, it definitely is. And then all of a sudden, like the lawn's on fire, like our synthetic turf, and it's just melting away around the side of the fire. And it's just like murking its way away from the fire. Like it was almost like it was lava spreading across so we had to get these big buckets of water and just throw it all over the fire. And it was like this noxious, like it was just like this awful steam and smoke just going all over the back. I went to all run inside to escape the fumes. And then I was like, oh, what a disaster that was. And when I was pretty down on myself, like going, such an idiot. Now we actually can't go outside. Like we actually can't go. It's too dangerous for the kids because of all those like fumes that are going. It looked like the whole house on fire. But yeah, got inside, and then Benji and Sammy, their kids and my son went upstairs, and Benji went to use the toilet. And Sam went in with him. He was like, I'll help you. I've just learned how to use the toilet. I'll help. I was like, oh, this is weird. And they went in there and they locked the door. And I was like, you guys right there? And then like Sammy's like, yeah, I'm just helping. I've just learned how to do this. So I'm helping. I could hear him saying stuff like, is it out yet? And he's like, no, it's coming. And he goes, you just keep pushing. It's going to come. Keep pushing. And so he's like literally coaching Benji through it. I was like, oh my God. So I went downstairs and told everyone there. I was laughing. I was like, oh, it's actually quite funny. But I went back upstairs and they couldn't work out how to unlock the door from the inside. And they started to panic and we couldn't get them out. And I was like, oh my God, the boys are stuck in there. And they really panicked. Inside, I was panicking more because I was like, it's actually quite a hard lock to get out. They're going to be, I don't know how, it's a big brand new door. I'm like, I don't know how, like, do we smash open the door? I don't know. Is it going to knock them over? Like in the end, it took about, 20 minutes of panic. We managed to get them out. And then they went down, and then I was like, okay, good, that's done with. We can just relax inside. I was on the couch. I was like, good, we're relaxing. And then there's just thing after thing went wrong. We found ourselves in the garage playing with the boys, and then Luna, their youngest one, knocked on the door, and I opened the door and just smashed her right in the nose, and like she went flying backwards and cried for like half an hour. And I was just like, this whole thing's a disaster. They stayed for so long. And I was like, why are they still here? This is just a fucking disaster. And I ended up leaving it at like 8 o'clock at night or something. And that's right, we couldn't get Sammy in the car. He took off down the street because he didn't want to leave. And it's just I said to Penny, fuck, that was a disaster. And then she goes, that wasn't your best day, was it? I said, no, it wasn't. And I remember thinking, we'll never see him again. Missy sent me the longest message that night. It was a beautiful message about how much they loved it. I was like, what? It was a disaster. But it took me a while to realize that it was like the imperfections of the whole day that made it so wonderful. And it was such a lovely reminder for me, or such a lovely moment for me to realize that like we're all imperfect, life's imperfect, and it's the imperfections that really truly connect us in life. And that's what we need to embrace more, rather than trying to make sure everything's perfect, because nothing's perfect, especially not in my life.
It's such a great story. It's such a great story in all the right ways. And I know it would have probably been like terrifying to go through, because obviously you're being the host and wanting to make sure everything was great. But I think it's a story that so many people will love reading this book.
Thank you. But I actually sent it to Missy before the book came out to say, hey, just checking you're cool with all this before I put it in the book. And she said, I don't remember any of that stuff happening. She goes, oh, Dan, oh, yeah, no. Oh, that's right. Yeah, there was that. Yeah, I forgot about the smoky stuff. Yeah, what was the toilet thing? She just, like, they'd actually forgotten. It's funny, like, we build up those things in our heads so much, like, oh, this is so bad. Often people don't even notice. Like, Missy forgot all that stuff. She goes, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was quite funny.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of hilarious, because at the end of the day, we often kind of worry about how we'll be perceived and everything around that. But at the end, but just having those moments together, even if everything goes wrong, it still can be a huge amount of fun.
Totally, yeah.
I've got one kind of last question for you, which is talking about you have talked a lot about social media and the space of social media, and particularly, and it's funny that we have talked about perceptions and stuff, because obviously the impact of social media on self-perception is very interesting. In your eyes, and I'm going to put you on the spot with this question a little bit. What is one method you think that people can use immediately to kind of start changing their relationship with their social media?
Well, the one I've used, so I'm in Canberra at the moment. I've spoke last night at the theatre, and then I've got another one tonight. And when I'm away in a hotel by myself, no family around, social media becomes a real issue for me. Like I look back on the amount of time I've spent sitting in a hotel room just scrolling through Instagram or whatever it is. In fact, it's mainly just Instagram. And I always, so the most common emotion you get after 10 minutes on social media apparently is regret. And that makes sense. Like, I've never spent 20 minutes on Instagram and gone, shit, that was good. Like, I've never once sat there and gone, God, that was just such a great way to spend. I always regret it. And so what I'm doing right now, and this isn't in the book, but what I'm doing right now for social media is I'm deleting it. I've deleted the apps that I'm most addicted to from my phone, and I only check them through my laptop. And so that means I don't take my laptop everywhere I go. So I will check it, but then it's clunky. Like the operating system's clunky on your laptop. You can't check messages properly. It doesn't flow properly. So the experience isn't as easy to get. It's harder to go down a rabbit hole on your laptop. So I'll check it in fact, it's so clunky that it's 5 minutes. It's kind of like, oh, this is shit. And so you'll spend about 5 minutes. So that's what I'm doing right now in my life. Is I've deleted them all from my phone, and I'm just checking on my laptop and messaging people back from my laptop. And so that's what I'm doing now. But what I wrote about in the book was just, it's a bigger thing. It's just identifying the activity that you love so much. That it's an activity you're really good at. So Nick, for you, it might be writing. It's probably writing. For me, I don't know. It's probably running, I think, or maybe, probably running. But when you're doing that activity, you reach a state of flow where if time becomes irrelevant. If someone said, how long have you been doing this for? You'd say, I actually couldn't tell you. I don't know. I'm not sure. Or if someone says, what are you thinking about? You'd say, I don't know. I'm not thinking, this is just happening. Have a think about what the activity is and make time for it in your week. Just because when you're doing that, you feel validated, you feel loved, you feel like you belong somewhere. And that's why we go to social media ultimately. Like, that's why we're going there, because we're seeking validation, we're seeking some love, but it doesn't count. It doesn't work through social media. So have a think about the activity you're really good at and get stuck into it.
I know I could definitely use that advice. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Hugh. So for all of our listeners, Let Go is published by Penguin Random House, and you can get a copy of it right now from booktopia.com.au. Now on to our interview with Paul Kennedy. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Nick Wasiliev, and for today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Kennedy. He's an ABC journalist, and he's here today to talk to us about his brand new memoir of him growing up in the southern suburbs of Melbourne, in Frankston specifically, Funkytown. Paul, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your new memoir, Funkytown.
Funkytown is my story from 1993. That was the year that I was trying to finish high school and going through all these, these sort of strange moments that you do when you're finishing high school, trying to achieve, but not really getting where I needed to be at school. It was also, Funkytown is the name that we had for Frankston, which is where I lived. So Frankston's an hour from the city. Back then it was right on the edge of the urban sprawl. The urban sprawl's far surpassed that now, but Frankston's still relatively the same. It's a place that I loved growing up in, and I've spent most of my life here. But one of the nicknames we had for it was Funkytown, and that's mainly from people who live here, who can, who and my little sister used to call it Funkytown with a cheeky grin, because we all know what Frankston is. And for us, it was a great place. At that time, though, it was a really scary time with a serial killer on the loose, a serial killer who murdered 3 women. All through that winter, police came in great numbers, record numbers. The national media came to Frankston for the first time, and we were in that whirlpool of fear and frustration and town meetings and trying to work out how we could live through this period. But the streets were empty, and there were a lot of people really paralysed by the fear of it all. So that's the backdrop, and the rest of it is my story, trying to navigate not only school, but also trying to make it into the AFL.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating book, and your journey over the course of it is, especially fascinating. I feel like now, because I don't want to I feel like it's bad to say it because I feel like it puts the book in a box somewhat, but it feels like eerily similar in terms of that kind of time where people were scared all over the place. It feels eerily similar to, or people not wanting to go outside. It feels eerily similar to right now. Why was now the right time to revisit this particular chapter in your own life?
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, when I was writing the majority of the book in its final draft, I was in lockdown, and it did feel the same as 1993, with those empty streets and frustration and people scared and uncertain about what was going to happen. The pandemic in its first stages felt like that's that time when the serial killer was in Frankston. The timing for me was I'd written my 4th book about 5 years ago, and I wanted to write this book. I'd wanted to write this book for a long time, but it felt like a good time. It explores themes of boys becoming men and masculinity, and that's a big discussion everywhere now, which is a really good thing. And I felt like if I could visit and discuss those themes through my own experiences, that might be helpful. And the other reason it's timely, I think, is because I'm thinking more and more about those decisions I made as an adolescent, as a teenager, and I've got 3 sons. And I have great trepidation waiting for them to hit that mark of 16, 17 when they will start looking for other role models, and they'll start being pulled into the male culture around them. And that's what happened to me. And I am, of got no idea how they're going to navigate that, but I felt like it might be helpful for me to tell my story and express, tell them about my mistakes and my failures, and without being too judgmental and without, hitting anyone over the head with my thoughts on what they should do with their life. It's my experience, and those things are really important to discuss about suppressing our emotions and rejecting or disparaging what boys see to be as feminine, which is, being creative and wanting to find love and all of those things, which I ideally wanted to do at that time, but couldn't really express that. And instead, I was a binge drinker, and I embraced this lifestyle of getting into fights and all those sorts of things. So the timing, I think, had to do a little bit with my sons, but also I've always wanted to write the book, and I thought I couldn't wait any longer.
Yeah, it felt there's something about this that feels really, really timely. Because I think discussions around masculinity and such are becoming an increasingly relevant topic, especially in the current times that we're in now. There's in the age of 2021. Mental health is something that is such an important topic. It's been thrust kind of front and center by the pandemic. I think people are talking about it a lot more. The impact that it has a lot more. Was that something that was always kind of a main goal going forward with this document? Did you start by thinking I need to kind of tell my own story about my relationship with the mental health challenges that I experienced during this time, or did it just kind of emerge as you were putting it down on the page?
Yeah, I knew when I started to write my story that I wanted people to be able to understand the themes as their own. So the book is, I didn't write the book because I think my life has been extraordinary, or even my 18th year on Earth was extraordinary. I wrote it because I think it's actually really common for people to feel the way I did as a boy, and that's that's with that false bravado that I got around with, and it's a stifling way to be a teenager. I had great friends through that time, so there wasn't. Although I went through a range of emotions, I thought this was pretty normal, and I had a lot of fun. I was playing football for the Stingrays team, which was that representative under-18 team, and I was having great experiences. I played at the MCG. I always wanted to do that. And in the end, I didn't play anywhere near as well as I had dreamed I might, but I was having some good times along the way. But certainly the bad choices that I made were to do with not being able to express myself. So that is a theme that runs through the book, and absolutely deliberately, because I think that's a really common thing for 17-year-olds to feel, male or female, and that the feedback has been that a lot of people are reading the book and thinking to themselves that he's writing about me, or he's writing about my brother or sister, or my son or daughter. So that's really pleasing, and that was absolutely something that I set out to achieve, was to share my story with the different sort of pitfalls that we all go through.
That's the best. I think that's the best compliment you can get when you've written something that people feel they connect with on a personal level, no matter the context or the background. I think that's you can't ask for much more than that.
No, I've loved that. Yeah.
Speaking of this particular time, you said it was a tough time in your life, and I love that you talk about a teacher in this book who you quoted in kind of the description for this book that this teacher saw you heading down the wrong path, and that they tried to kind of put you on the right path. Looking back, how do you feel that moment of context? How do you feel about that moment of context and relationship with that teacher, in terms of, do you think it set you on a path to where you are today? Or do you think, how significant is that relationship for you, looking back at it now?
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of good teachers along the way in primary school and high school. I was really lucky in that regard as well. I had a beautiful family. I had great teachers. So there were no shortage of people in my life that were trying to help me go from childhood to adulthood and lead a good life. But there was one teacher who made a big difference to me in my life, Mrs. Mack. She gave me a book called I Heard the Owl Call My Name. And looking back and writing the book, I can really pinpoint that as a significant moment for me, because I wasn't a big reader growing up. I would like to say, as an author and as a journalist of 25 years, I would like to tell you that, I was reading Dickens at 10 and 11, but I wasn't a big reader. I used to read schools texts. So I'd read To Kill a Mockingbird and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I've read some great books, but all in class and only when I was made to. And Mrs. Mack gave me this book and said, I think you'll like this. And it was I Heard the Owl Call My Name by Margaret Craven. It's a beautiful book, as many people know. It's a classic. It's something I wouldn't have chosen for myself, about a religious minister who goes to live with an Indigenous tribe in British Columbia to learn enough about life that he's ready to die because he's terminally ill. Never in my wildest dreams would I have looked twice at this book, but when she gave it to me, and she was a very influential person in my life, I read it, and I can distinctly remember the words and the sentences in that story causing me to feel a sense of electricity and this great excitement and just this great satisfaction from reading this beautiful, beautiful story that I could only ever get through playing football. So I thought, well, if this makes me feel as good as playing footy, then I'll keep reading. So reading's been a big part of my life ever since, and that was really due in a large part to Mrs. Mack giving me that book and being a great literature teacher in my VCE years. But it was a bit more than that, because Mrs. Mack was the one that suggested I get into journalism. And so when my high school days were falling apart around me, and I ended up getting expelled for an incident on the night before mark-up day, and ended up in police custody. The seed had already been sown for me to maybe try journalism. And then I tried to get a cadetship at the end of the year and failed that as well. But after, and this is not in the book because it finishes at the end of 1993, after that, I went back and kept trying and gave it my all, and eventually became a copy kid in a newsroom, and that's how my journalism started. So, yeah, a lot of the seeds of my life, as it's turned out, for good or ill, was in year 12.
Yeah, I kind of am curious to know what was the key message or the learning that you got from that, because often I think there's that life message or that life realization or that significant moment that you get from a specific experience. What do you think that was for you in that particular moment?
The experience with I Heard the Owl Call My Name particularly was, and I tracked down Mrs. Mack after many years and asked her why she gave me that book. And she said, I could see that you were showing some signs of self-destruction. And I said, really? And she said, yes. And she gave me that book, she said, because she wanted to show me that there were other ways to be a man. And by that, she meant that's the character in this book, Brian, who was the minister, and the other characters, parts of the community that he moved to in British Columbia. And there was a lot of, those people were gentle, they were generous, they were patient, and they were really caring, and not at all in the way that I was starting to carry on as a 17-year-old. So absolutely, she knew better than me how to show me that type of man. And I wanted, not only did I finish wanting to sort of be a little bit gentler and more loving and patient and all the rest of it, but I actually finished the book thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could one day write a book like Margaret Craven, or somewhere half as good? So the writing was also something that that I was developing at that stage and wanting to be a writer. And so, yeah, I could draw a direct line back to then as well about, because why did I want to be a journalist? I wanted to write stories for a living. And that was due to the influence of the English department of my school and Mrs. Mack in particular.
I want to ask you a little bit about revisiting this particular time in Frankston. I know we were talking about this before we started recording, but you mentioned that this happened during the backdrop of these murders that you speak about in the book, and I found it so fascinating that you mentioned that that people in Frankston still haven't kind of forgotten it. It hasn't really changed that much, which I find so funny because we live in a time of fast connection and fast, things are always changing in the internet age, and it's interesting that this still feels the same to you. What was it like revisiting this particular historical period of time in Frankston?
Yeah, going back to 1993 was really interesting to me. In fact, I went to the local library, Frankston Library, and went back through all of the newspapers of the time and read them all again. And because in writing a memoir, I think it's helpful if you can measure your memories against some documents of the past. And I was lucky, my mum never threw anything out. So all of the things that I write about in the book have almost got that evidence still there. So, but my memories were strong. And the other part of writing this book was I was in lockdown last year, writing a fair bit of and rewriting a fair bit of the book. And one of the things you could do in lockdown, one of the few things, was go for walks. And so I was living in the same suburb and still live in that same suburb where I grew up on the outskirts of Melbourne. And when I went walking, I was walking past crime scenes from 1993. And I was, walking through the tea tree of the local beach, and I was walking past landmarks that I still had been writing about for Funkytown. So those times reminded me that it hasn't changed all that much. And it's 28 years ago. That murderous spree feels like yesterday. It doesn't feel so long ago. But also the place that I'm still living in doesn't feel like 28 years ago. It's and maybe it's because occasionally or more than occasionally, I'll bump into people on the street that I grew up with, and so people that still live here, and my family still lives here, and hardly anyone moves away because it's such a lovely place. But the other thing is that I was looking through those newspapers and reading editorials, really strong and brilliant editorials about violence against women. And we live in a suburb where the first Neighbourhood Watch was founded some decades ago. And the discussion around it's not safe for women to go out at night and they should be doing this and they should be doing that, that was discussed in a big way and debated in 1993. And some of those editorials could have been written yesterday or last week, because we're still having those discussions after crimes against women these days. So to me, that was striking as well. And so I try to, in the telling of the story, address those themes in a subtle way, because I didn't want to go back as this 46-year-old grey-haired old man and go and lump all of my judgment on my teenage self and everyone else in my life at that time. But I could certainly weave through some of the wisdom that I have now, if I have any wisdom.
Oh, don't sell yourself short. Come on. I suppose as well. I'd imagine that entire experience of revisiting it and putting it on the page and learning all about the historical context of Frankston would make you view this particular place in a new light, or maybe a new, I wouldn't want to say necessarily newfound respect or like newfound appreciation for the place that you've grown up and you've lived in. But I'm imagining it, you'd look at it in a different way.
Yeah, I look at it. I look at the place around me now as a father, a married man who's got 3 kids, and my mum and dad still live in the same house, but that I guess the suburb is smaller than what I remember. But I've always loved living here. We grew up in a housing estate, which was brand new to the area, and that was in the late 70s. And I was a little kid then. We moved here when I was two, when Dad left the army. So growing up in this housing estate, I thought it was paradise. And looking back, I still do. Houses were springing up on the street. We were playing. The frames of the houses were our monkey bars, and we'd set up jumps out the front on the footpath, and just to take the skin off our knees. And it was a typical suburban upbringing, and everyone was young. Even the school we went to was brand new, so everything was new, and even the adults seemed young. It was a youthful place without any of the problems that I would grow up to then later learn was quite normal in the world, and including Frankston. My eyes were opened as I grew older, and saw the disadvantage around me, and saw that people might be struggling with their families and all the rest of it. My dad used to call people in a very fond way, he called them battlers, and there were battlers around as well. So all of this sort of played into me living in a place that I adored living in, and I moved away for a little while, but when I settled down with my wife and we bought a home, it was back in Seaford where I started. If you had told me that when I was a kid, that I'd spend virtually my entire life in this one suburb, then I might have said that's not going to happen, but it has. I view the place as a great place to grow up, great place to raise kids, and in that way, it hasn't changed all that much. But that's my experience, and I'm sure other people have vastly different experiences.
Yeah, I imagine it's places are always, they mean so much to so many different people, and it's interesting that you view it in that way now, which is really fascinating. As kind of like a final question to ask about this book, and I feel like we've already kind of covered it a little bit, but I do think a lot of readers are going to find this book really fascinating to look at, examine, see how it compares to their own lives and their own journeys that they've experienced. What is the one message that you want readers to take away from sitting down and reading Funkytown?
I think once you write a book like this, you're best to leave it to the reader and they can take what they can from it. But I'm hoping that, particularly if my sons read this book, they might pick up that it's better to be yourself than to follow the crowd. And you will, when you reach those teenage years, you're open to influences of role models and friends around you and all the rest of it. But my advice would be to be yourself. And for me, that was not something I felt comfortable doing. I was, I adopted a macho image. I made out that I was, that I was up for a fight and I wanted to drink and all those sorts of things. But that was driven largely by insecurity. And so, I think a takeaway from my experience might be that and certainly by the end of the book, I've reached the conclusion that it's better if I take off that mask of bravado and just be myself. I open myself up to different relationships. A whole new world would open up to me if I wasn't restricted by this culture of masculinity. So that's perhaps the thing that I hope people take out of it. And if they learn a bit more about me along the way, then that's good too. And also I hope they have a laugh because there's some funny things that happen there. I didn't take everything so seriously, and I did have some good friends and had some good times along the way. I think that's probably another message that I haven't spoken much about, is that the power of friends. I've spoken to my friends since about their reflections on that time, that troubled time where we didn't achieve any greatness, and their feeling was the same as mine, that we had good fun, and we were able to get through anything because we had great friends around us. And not everyone's lucky enough to have that, I know. But we were, really great mates. And I know now that I loved my friends, and I was glad they were by my side even when I was starting to veer off the rails.
I'd love to keep talking, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Paul, thank you so much for your time today. Funkytown is published by Affirm Press, and you can get your copy right now from booktopia.com.au. Now on to our interview with Paul Barbera. My name is Nick Wasiliev, and I'm delighted to be joined by photographer, designer, and more, Paul Barbera, to discuss his new collection of photography, Where They Purr. Paul, welcome. So to start us off, getting you to just tell us a little bit about Where They Purr.
Well, I guess we'll just begin from the beginning, which is the original project that has sort of been going for 13 years, and there's 2 books out published by Frame, is called Where They Create, which started actually in a friend of mine's art studio in Rome. And so maybe like 5 or 6 years into that, which would basically be, as I'm doing commercial work, I would, look up an artist while I'm in Cape Town or wherever I happen to be, Paris or someplace. And I would go off and shoot their studio, and that would just be sort of a fun supplement to traveling for the job that I'm going for anyway. And then I'd see cats. So I was like, well, this Where They could be a lot of different things. So I kind of went a little crazy. I registered Where They Purr, and where they die, and where they live, and where they're homeless. I had all these ideas, but Where They Purr was just because I saw lots of cats and I like cats, and we have a cat. Technically, he's living with my wife's parents in Perth, but we had a cat, and so I would just start posting to Instagram, and that was sort of but no aspirations for it to be a book at all, zero. I mean, that was the last project, and so the thing with publishers is, it takes a lot. It takes the perfect idea. What they say is like, you will find a great project will find the money, or the money will find the project. And it's the same with the book. And so I pitched a lot of ideas. I've got a few books out, but this particular one was not really an idea that I pitched per se. It was more that it was a conversation in passing. And after I pitched some other ideas based off the back of Where They Create, that she was like, well, like animals. And I'm like, well, that's funny, because I've actually been shooting cats. She's like, no, tell me more. And to give credit to Queenie, who's my wife, and writer and thinker, and many other skill sets, brought it together. We put a pitch together, and like a week later, she's like, okay, yeah, I got signed off from the UK. We're doing it.
I love that it started out based in, like, you were working in that social media space, like in Instagram and stuff, and the interest came from there. So many photographers that we've like interviewed and stuff, they often, they have that, they use Instagram hugely for that profile, that visual element.
Yeah.
How vital or important was it for you in terms of determining the photography that you like to use, particularly for books like in terms of how did it kind of form the basis as well for the photography that you wanted to go with and the direction you wanted to go with for this book?
Well, that's contrary to something you mentioned earlier in a funny way. Well, actually, no. I mean, this might apply to what we just spoke about earlier, which was about dabbling in lots of different things. I dabble in, so I will shoot a lot of different subjects, but everything has, I strive towards making sure that everything has a sort of interchangeable, similar feel, whether it be shooting a cat, or whether I'm doing, a shoot for Mr. Porter, or a portrait of Tatuando, or whether it's a cat. It should all feel and sit under the same kind umbrella, even though the subject and its purpose might be very different. So, I mean, that's answering sort of the second part of your question. The first part, I guess, was, how important has Instagram been in helping determine that? I mean, it is and it isn't. I kind of feel like I was at the first wave of the social media, more of the Tumblr, Facebook ilk. And I actually didn't transition very, very well to Instagram. I kind of just didn't use it for a long time. And, it became the main player. But Where They Purr, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of when I started, because I actually had a website of Where They Purr before there was an Instagram account. But I guess in concept, the idea of being able to communicate directly with people that might like your work, I would credit, whatever little mini successes I've had, 100% just to the fact that I've been able to create my own, communicate, and create and curate my own dialogue, right? And then share it with a potential audience. And that's been great. It really opened up, I guess just a more democratization of photography.
Yeah, and it's great as well when people actually show that interest around the photography that you do. And I do want to talk about your love of cats with this book. What was it actually like bringing felines into that studio photography setting? I mean, I'm assuming unlike when photographing a human, you can tell them what to do and stuff, but cats can have a mind of their own. What was it like bringing cats into that setting? Did you discover things about cats, even though you are a cat lover, that you might not have actually known before?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's fair to say that, like I said, I never set out to make a cat book. The cats that I've been shooting were more incidental, right? They weren't like I was going out to search a cat. It wasn't a project per se. It was like, as I said, a side project to the main project. So it's funny, but the book is not in chronological order, but, and maybe this is just only my sort of own psyche, but from the beginning to the end, from the first shoot to the last shoot, there was such an evolution, at least in my own, or maybe it just got easier. So I thought that I communicated or documented or got the essence of an animal, the cat, from the very first to the very last, because it took sort of not new skill set, but another type of skill set, because you've got, they're either incredibly static, which means you can set up a lovely shot and compose it and sort of put them into place, or so they go from completely static to completely erratic. They go from one side to the other, and so that's more akin to shooting an Olympics or a sprinter, and so by the end I'd sort of developed. I was working with 3 cameras with 3 focal lengths, and I'm kind of in a way I got very good at predicting where the cat would go, how to make it sit still, and treats don't work. That definitely was not something. It was something that everyone was like, oh, we'll give them some treats, but it was really challenging. I mean, there was blood spilt. I haven't really spoken about it too much, but I got attacked. I didn't have stitches, but I had to go and get a tetanus shot. And one of the owners also it was just an accident. Cats can be very skittish, and he sort of tripped, and the cat freaked out, and it clawed his way out of his arms and caught his eye. And it was, blood has been spilt making this book. You would, quite funny that we think about such soft, very little cuddly things. But yeah, so it's definitely a skill set that I've developed.
It's amazing that the vibe I get is that cats really just do their own thing. It's like they often sense that they just do their own thing. You can't tell them what to do. Was there any did you learn any misconceptions that people have around cats? Like you were talking about treats and stuff earlier. People assume that just treat them like any animal, give them some food and they'll be fine. Was there one misconception that has been completely disproven?
The misconception very easy, like I said, is look, most cats are not trainable, or at least it takes a lot of work to train them, but you can pat a cat into submission.
Really?
I think that's true of all domesticated mammals. Maybe that's true of us too, and dogs. So like that was something that, you just had to sort of go, okay, I want you to stay here. How do I communicate that? I'm going to give you lots of affection, but not all cats want affection. So, every time you found a rule, it was broken by the next house and the next cat. And just when you thought you've met your hardest cat to shoot, you met the next cat that was even more skittish. I mean, there was a house that had 3 cats, but the 3 cats didn't make it into the book because one of them was just, nothing worked. It just because 2 were compliant didn't mean the 3rd was. So that's where you tried every little trick in the book, but you at a certain point they time out, and that's another thing that I learned is they're not infinitely going to be engaged in the making of your cat book. They'll often just decide that they've had enough and that they're just so one cat, Humphrey, he ended up after we had spent a solid 4 hours, and he was very compliant. He was a rag doll, so pick him up, put him down, just stays there. At some point he was just like, done, I'm out. And he just hid between the pool and some reeds and a metal fence, and there was no getting him out. He was gone. He was as good as under the house. So, you also have to be, and again, I'm going to bore you with this last anecdote. Like, it's a bit like you need to be simultaneously constructing your image and wishing the cat will be in its right place and stay in the right place, but at the same time not caring at all, not giving a shit, because the minute you care, the cat can tell, and if you have a nervous energy, the cats and animals pick up on that. So you've got to sort of find this sweet spot between never running, just walking fast. Never doing lots of sudden movements, but just work quickly. Because you only have this little tiny slither where, and it wasn't all times. I mean, often there was one cat where she just said, here's the keys to the house, there's the cat, I'll be back in 5 hours. And I'm like, huh? And this cat it was a big cat, it was a plus size cat. And she had like a 3-story house, and I'd have to carry this cat, which again was quite happy being carried, but it was like a sack of potatoes, right? Where it just flops when you pick it up. And I was carrying it up the stairs, trying to carry my 2 cameras, and it was like slipping out of your hands. And then he's getting uncomfortable. And if not that you're going to drop him, you'll put him on the stairs, he'll run back down. You've got to go the whole thing up again. So there were lots of little challenges like that you just sort of had to really systematically map out the shots you wanted to do. And, and if a cat's not playing in one angle, you have to be ready to sort of switch to, sometimes I might be, I'm shooting on the couch, say behind me, and I'm all lined up. And then the cat just has had enough and goes underneath the day bed. So I have to quickly come around this way and then reframe, and maybe I coax around a little bit, but maybe not. And then that becomes the shot. And that happened all the time. Yeah.
It gets a real sense of very spontaneous in the moment photography. I want to talk to you about the spaces and the houses that you were shooting in, if I can, because I'm assuming that a lot of that would also, of course, there's the cats and what the cats do, but there's also the actual space itself and how they interact with that space. What were some of your favorite houses in the book to shoot at?
Look, I mean, favorite in there's potentially the kind of the light, right? Is one whole kind of category when you're at a space that just has good amounts of light, the kind of light that I look for. That's sort of its own thing. Then you have a house that's incredibly well put together architecturally, that is in synergy with the furniture. That's Kennedy Nolan's place. Is it Molly? Yeah, it's Molly. Like that's just incredible. That place was just put together. It was a British Blue. But it can also be like Sarah Shiners. She is an architect, and her house is not architectural in that way that's been built from the ground up, but she's just like super styling and impeccable taste. And so the cat interacting with all those objects was just also equally amazing. I mean, it was a bit sad because, in fact, you only have 6 images per cat, right? I mean, it just worked out about 6 to 8 images, maybe 10, but, 6 pages max, or was it 8? No, the 6. And so we did no outdoors. And some of the houses were like incredible, the inside, outside, of course, being Australia. But we missed, I had to sort of edit all those out, and it basically, and one cat, Simon in Tassie, he was a street cat, and basically when I agreed to shooting the cat, she just said, I want you to know this cat never comes inside. It's only an outdoor cat. And this is a book about interiors. I just don't mind one shot outside, but not the whole thing. But I'm like, the architects were really, really interesting, Cumulus. The house looked amazing. I happened to be going to Tassie to shoot another cat, so I just had to make it happen. And a week before, she said, I don't know what's going on, but Simon is now an indoor cat. So, and it was great because they had like, you'll see a shot with the, in Tassie, I'm looking up through a double-story height loft, and there's a little cat sort of peering over, or the cat running through the main space, looking down. So look, some of the houses were more challenging because either the combination of the light, where the cat wants to sit, and my ability to sort of, you've got this contrast of macro and micro. So the cat, to understand the cat and feel the cat and sense the cat, you need to be right up close. But then it's not about interiors anymore. So you pull right back and it becomes about the space, but then you don't see the cat. And so to get this balance between the two was just, that was the most, do you have a shot that is a little dot of a cat? Like, where's Wally? Because that's the other thing, is that at some point I realized that I could get a shot of a cat in every single, so I could shoot a cat in every single shot. That became the mantra, right? It's not to just shoot like, there's a beautiful corner of the room and then there's the cat that's, that was in that room but close up. No, every shot has a cat. It's a bit like, where's Wally?
I think it's a good way to go. It certainly pays off in the book because you see that interaction of actual space with the cat as well. I suppose as kind of a good ending point for us to end this discussion, was it at the end of it all, looking back and seeing all the work that has been completed and how the book has turned out, how do you hope people will actually view their own spaces differently from picking up this book, having a read of it, and seeing how these animals interacted with that space? They might even have a cat of their own, for example, that interacts with their home space in a similar way. How do you hope people will view their spaces differently?
I don't know. We all pick up magazines and books and, well, I'll speak for myself. I'm not going to speak for everyone. Have house envy or interior envy. And maybe the nicest takeaway will be that someone said to me in the making of the book, you're never going to find anyone with nice interiors, because people with nice interiors wouldn't have a cat, because the cat would destroy it. And, I think if you're a cat owner and you understand cats, you know exactly how to create a safe cat environment, that the cat can release its cat instincts, its feline instincts, and live in a space that is highly curated and crafted. And so I think the takeaway for me is, so where they create the driving force behind it, really, as it's developed over years, but the driving force is really to inspire people to just follow their own path and be creative, right? That anyone can do it, and here the working spaces, like go off and be inspired and follow your own path. And maybe with this book, it's like, well, anyone can have a cat, no matter what kind of space you have, and the cat will adapt and bring a lovely life force into the house. This, as Jean Cocteau says, they are the living embodiment of my space.
It's a great way to put it, and it also I hope makes a standard space. People look at that standard space in a new way off the back of that. They actually see that space that they may occupy and view in a certain way, but they'll look at this and go, "Hey, look, this is that element where their cat can express themselves. They can do that in this space too, which can be a really beautiful thing."
Yeah. I mean, either you're into cats or you're not.
Thank you so much for your time today, Paul. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. So for our listeners, Where They Purr is published by Tamsin Hudson, and you can get your copy right now from booktopia.com.au. Thanks to Hugh Van Cuylenburg, Paul Kennedy, and Paul Barbera. You can find links to all the books discussed today in our show notes, or head over to booktopia.com.au. Stay tuned on Friday for our next podcast, where we'll be discussing the books that we are reading at the moment. As always, thanks for listening, and never stop reading.